6:35 hours local time, commercial satellites passing over the Taiwan Strait detected something that immediately triggered emergency monitoring protocols inside the Pentagon. More than 70 Chinese naval vessels were maneuvering simultaneously into coordinated positions surrounding Taiwan from the north, south, and east.
Iranian forces
Within minutes,
have mined
Taiwan's
the Strait of
Ministry of
Hormuz.
National Defense
Every oil
confirmed the
tanker in
unthinkable.
region has
The People's
stopped
Liberation
moving.
Army had
The
initiated
American
one of the
fleet is
largest
moving in
encirclement
to reopen
exercises
it.
ever
Standing
conducted
in their
around the
way
island.
are
But this
hundreds
was
of
not a
invisible
normal military
devices
drill,
sitting
because for the
silently
first
on
time,
seabed,
Chinese forces were
waiting.
openly rehearsing what
On March
analysts describe as a
14th,
joint blockade
the USS
operation,
Tripoli
a
was
full-spectrum
ordered to the
strategy
Middle East.
designed to
What she
isolate
is sailing
Taiwan from the
into
outside
would be one
world
of the most
without launching an
dangerous
immediate
phases
amphibious
of the
invasion.
entire
And then the
operation.
situation escalated
Every
even further.
mine
At
requiring
Aero
precision
712
to locate,
hours,
patience
Taiwanese
to
radar
neutralize,
stations detected
and
waves of
constant
PLA
protection
Air Force
against
aircraft
Iranian
crossing the
drones and
median
missiles,
line
while the
simultaneously,
fleet sits
while
slow and exposed
Chinese
in a
H-6K
narrow
strategic
channel.
bombers armed with anti-ship cruise
This
missiles
is what she
moved
was
toward the
built for.
Philippine Sea.
The Strait
At the
of
same time,
Hormuz is
multiple
21
Chinese
miles
Coast Guard
wide
cutters
at
began
its
operating near
narrowest
major
point.
Taiwanese shipping
30%
corridors,
of
while
the
cyber
world's
attacks targeted
seaborne oil
financial and
passes
communications
through it
infrastructure
every
on the
single
island.
day.
The blockade rehearsal
Iran
had already
knows
begun.
this.
Inside
Mind
Taiwan's
correct.
underground
The
command
strait does
centers,
not need to be
emergency
closed
combat
by
readiness
force.
protocols
It
activated
closes
across
itself.
all military
Every
branches.
captain in the
Anti-ship
region
missile
looks at that
batteries
water
moved
and makes
into
the
firing
same
positions.
calculation.
Mobile radar
The
systems
cargo
dispersed
is
into hardened
not
mountain
worth the
shelters.
hull.
Taiwanese
Modern
F-16V
naval
fighters
mines are
scrambled from
not
hidden
the
air
simple
bases as
floating
Patriot air
contact
defense
devices
crews
of
locked
past
onto
wars.
incoming aerial
Today's
contacts.
mines sit on
Then
the
came the
seabed
message from
or
Beijing.
anchor at a set
Chinese
depth
state media
below the
announced that the
surface,
exercise was intended to
invisible from
punish
the
what it
deck of
called
any ship
dangerous
passing
separatist
overhead.
activity,
They
and to
use a
demonstrate China's
combination of
ability to
sensors,
completely cut
magnetic,
Taiwan off from external
acoustic,
military
and
support during
pressure,
wartime.
each one
The meaning
waiting
was
for the specific
unmistakable.
signature of
This
a
was no
vessel
longer symbolic
large enough to
intimidation.
matter.
China was
A
rehearsing
magnetic
isolation
sensor
warfare,
detects the
and Washington
distortion a
immediately
steel
understood the
hull
implications.
creates in the
At a
Earth's
7:45
magnetic
hours,
field.
the
An
U.S.
acoustic
Indo-Pacific
sensor
Command
listens
ordered the
for the
USS
precise
Theodore
sound
Roosevelt Carrier
signature of
Strike
a
Group
ship's
to
engines
reposition
and
west of Guam,
propellers.
while American
A
P-8A
pressure
Poseidon
sensor
surveillance
feels the
aircraft
change in
surged
water
into the Philippine
displacement
Sea
as a
to
large
monitor
hull
Chinese naval
passes
movements in
above.
real time. The
Advanced
Pacific was
mines
suddenly shifting
require
toward its
all
most dangerous
three
moment in
conditions
years.
to be met
To
before they detonate.
understand why this
This
operation
means a
terrified
mine
military
can
planners
destroy a
across
ship
the world,
without the vessel
you need to
ever
understand the
physically
strategic
touching it.
transformation
The USS
currently taking
Tripoli
place inside the
carries
Chinese
specific
military.
answer to this
For
problem.
decades, analysts
She
focused
is
primarily
an
on the
America-class
possibility of a
amphibious
direct
assault
amphibious
ship,
invasion of
and
Taiwan,
unlike a
a
standard
massive
carrier,
D-Day
she
style
deploys
assault
with
involving thousands of
MH-53
troops crossing the
Sea
strait.
Dragon
But modern
helicopters,
Chinese doctrine
the
is
only
evolving.
airborne
Instead of immediate
platform in the
invasion,
US,
Beijing
Navy
increasingly appears
specifically
focused on
designed for
strangulation
mine
tactics.
countermeasures.
Blockade
Each Sea
first,
Dragon
isolation
can tow a
second,
sonar
pressure
sled
third,
through the water
and only
on
then, if
long
necessary,
cables,
invasion.
scanning the
This
seabed
strategy
in
changes
real
everything.
time and
Taiwan
transmitting
imports nearly
contact
all of its
data back
energy
to
and
the
much of
ship.
its food supply through
The
maritime
helicopter
shipping lanes.
crews work
Its economy depends on
sector by
uninterrupted
sector,
trade routes connecting it to
methodically
Japan,
clearing the route
South
the
Korea,
fleet will take
Southeast
through the
Asia,
strait
and the wider
before a
global market.
single surface
Even a
ship
temporary
moves
disruption
through
could
it,
create enormous
while the
economic and
Sea
political
Dragons
shockwaves,
sweep the
and
wider
China knows it.
corridor.
At approximately
Contacts
0810 hours,
precision work
satellite
fall to a
imagery
different
revealed
team
several Chinese Type
entirely.
0555 destroyers
Below deck
moving
on the
into
Tripoli,
positions east of
Navy
Taiwan,
explosive
a highly
ordnance
significant
disposal divers
development
are suiting
because it
up.
demonstrated
Wetsuits
PLA Navy
pulled on.
capability to operate
Breathing
beyond the
apparatus
first island
checked.
chain
Dive
while threatening
computers,
reinforcement routes
underwater
from the
lights,
Pacific side.
communication
This matters
gear,
enormously.
tools,
Historically,
everything
Taiwan's
inspected and
eastern
ready.
coastline was considered
Once
relatively
cleared,
safer
they climb
due to the
into
natural
rigid
barrier
hull
created by the
inflatable
island
boats
itself,
and motored
but modern
toward the
Chinese naval
coordinates
aviation,
flagged by the
long-range
sonar
missiles,
teams.
and expanding.
Behind them,
Blue
the
water
rest of
naval
the
capabilities are
formation
changing that
holds its
calculation
defensive
rapidly.
posture.
At the same time,
Machine gunners
Chinese
stand behind
DF-21D
their
and DF-26
weapons.
anti-ship
Lookouts
ballistic
sweep
missile
the
brigades
horizon in
reportedly entered
continuous
heightened readiness
rotation.
conditions along the mainland coast.
Fleet has
These are the
reduced
so-called
speed
carrier
to a
killer
crawl.
systems designed
At higher
specifically to
speeds,
threaten
the
U.S.
risk of
aircraft
running over
carriers
an
operating in the
undetected
western
mine is
Pacific.
too great.
And suddenly,
Every
the
ship
battlefield
moves
became much
slower.
larger than Taiwan.
01:34:45 a.m. Al
Because this
Assad
crisis
Air
is
Base, Iraq.
ultimately about
A
one
$500 million
terrifying question.
universal
Can the
translator,
United States
the
still
ground
project
station
military
for the
power inside China's
BACN,
expanding
doesn't
missile
just
envelope?
explode,
That
it
question now
vanishes in a
dominates
thermal
every
wipe
whiteout. The first Kayam-1 ballistic missile utilized a maneuverable re-entry vehicle to adjust its trajectory in the final seconds,
defensive sectors near the
slamming into a
Panghu
specific
Islands.
cluster of satellite
Analysts believe
arrays.
the PLA
This was a
was
surgical
reversing
removal of the
ISR
American
saturation
eye
time,
in the sky.
using large
Military
numbers of
analysts
reconnaissance
assume
drones
a
to
system's
overload
complexity
Taiwan's
is its
detection
shield.
networks,
But
while
for the
mapping radar
BACN ground
frequencies and
station, its
response times.
$500 million
This is
price tag
modern
and
warfare
high-tech
evolving in real
electronic
time.
signature were
No side
actually a
wants to fire the
bullseye.
first missile,
In seconds,
but every
a
side is
sequence of
already preparing
Cam-1
the battlefield.
and Fate
Electronic warfare units
3-1-3
activated
missiles
across the region.
shredded the high-tensile
Cyber probes
steel of the
intensified
communication
against
modules,
communications
turning the
infrastructure.
U.S. Air Force's
Surveillance
most
aircraft
advanced
crowded
data
the
link
skies
into a
while submarines
$500 million
maneuvered silently
paperweight.
beneath the
The most
waves.
dangerous part of
And
a
then
battlefield
another
nerve center
escalation
isn't a
occurred.
hack
At
or a virus.
0855
It's the
hours,
fact that it
Japan
has a
announced that its
physical
self-defense
address.
forces
This is
had
the
deployed
story of a
additional fighter
massive
patrols near
intelligence
Okinawa.
failure that left
While
our
Japanese
universal
Aegis
translator
destroyers increased missile
vulnerable,
defense
and the
readiness.
high-tech mystery
Tokyo
response
understands that
that was
any
recently
Taiwan
discovered
conflict would
discarded
almost
in the Iraqi
certainly
dirt.
spill
But as
directly
the
into
debris of a
Japanese
secretive
operational zones.
two-stage
The
Ghost
entire
missile
Pacific
found in
Alliance system was
2024
beginning to
suggests
activate.
we finally
Meanwhile,
learned how to punch
Chinese
back
social
without
media
leaving a return
exploded with
address.
nationalist
The first
messaging
wave of
as
Iranian
footage emerged of
Qiyam-1
PLA
ballistic
rocket force
missiles
convoys
cleared the Zagros
moving through
Mountains
coastal
minutes
provinces.
earlier. The
Videos
Qiyam-1
showed
is a
transport of
finless,
erector launchers
liquid-fueled
carrying ballistic
predator.
missiles,
By removing
while
the
military
stabilizing
commentators
fins, the
openly
Iranians reduced the
discussed
radar
closing the
cross-section,
steel
the
ring
golf
around
ball
Taiwan.
on the screen, and
Psychological
increased the
pressure was
speed of the
becoming part of
re-entry
the
vehicle.
operation
On the
itself.
ground at Al
And
Asad,
Taiwan
there was no
faced an enormous dilemma. Respond
MIM-104
too
Patriot
aggressively,
battery to meet
and
them.
Beijing
The
could
intelligence
accuse
assessment
Taipei
had
of
suggested that
provocation.
Iran would not risk a
Respond too
direct
weakly,
state-on-state
and China
ballistic
normalizes
strike.
military
That assessment was
encirclement
the first
as a
thing to
permanent
die that
reality.
night. The target
This is
was a
exactly the
specific
gray
cluster
zone
of
strategy
windowless
China
containers and
prefers.
satellite arrays, the
Operate
ground
below the
station for the
threshold of open war,
BACN,
while
or
steadily
Battlefield
shifting
Airborne
strategic
Communications
conditions over
Node.
time.
Inside the
At
containers, the
0917
universal
hours,
translator of the U.S. Air Force was
Assets
processing
reportedly
gigabytes of
detected
data. The
unusual Chinese submarine
BACN
activity
system
east of
is what
Taiwan.
allows an
Multiple
F-22
PLA
Raptor
Navy
to talk to a
submarines may have
ground
moved into
commander's
interception
tablet
positions
or a Navy
designed to
destroyer
complicate
to
potential
share a
American
radar
naval
picture with an
intervention
Army
routes.
artillery
If
unit.
true,
It is
that
the
represents
bridge
a
between
major
different
escalation in
digital
operational
languages. When the
sophistication.
first
Because China is
Qiyam-1
no
warhead
longer simply
detonated, that
demonstrating
bridge ceased
coastal
to
defense
exist.
capability.
The sequence
It
was
is rehearsing
relentless.
layered
Following the
regional denial
Qiyam-1,
warfare
the
across air,
Fate 3-1-3
and
missiles
space
began their
domains
terminal dives. The Fate
And that is what
3-1-3
terrifies
is a
Western
solid-fuel
planners
precision
PLA
instrument.
does not
Unlike
necessarily
liquid-fueled
need to defeat
rockets
the
that
United
require a
States
lengthy
outright.
gas-up
It only
process,
needs to
the
make
Fate
intervention
3-1-3
enough,
is a
risky
bolt
enough,
out of the blue
and uncertain
weapon.
enough
It uses
that
composite
political
motor
hesitation
casings and
begins to
high-grade
emerge
guidance
inside
systems to
Washington
achieve a
itself.
circular error
That is the
probable,
real
a
strategic
measurement of
objective.
accuracy of less
Delay
than 10 meters.
intervention.
The missiles bracketed the
Alliance
BACN infrastructure.
Control escalation
One
tempo,
warhead shredded the
and
satellite
dominate the
uplink
opening
arrays.
phase before
Another punched through the
reinforcements
roof of the
arrive.
processing
At
center.
0940
The high
hours,
tensile steel
Taiwan's
of the
Ministry of
shipping
Defense
container-sized
announced that
modules
48
turned into
docked.
shrapnel.
Chinese
In
aircraft
seconds,
and dozens of naval
$500 million
vessels remained
of
active
battlefield
around the
logic
island,
was
while
reduced to
electronic
scorched
interference
earth and
continued
melted
affecting
silicon.
portions of
The
regional
personnel on the
communications
ground
traffic.
described the sound
No
not as
missiles
an
had been
explosion,
fired.
but as
No
a
ships had been
continuous
sunk.
physical weight
No
pressing
invasion had
down on their
begun.
chests.
Yet the
Each
region was
impact from
already
a
operating
Fate
under wartime
3-1-3
conditions
delivered
psychologically.
hundreds of pounds
This
of
is the
high
new face of
explosives directly
21st
into the
century
nerve
deterrence
centers.
warfare.
By the time
Not
the final
constant
missile
peace,
impacted the
not
screen at
total
the
war,
Combined Air
but
Operations
permanent
Center went
high-pressure
dark. The
confrontation.
universal translator
Tonight,
was dead.
Chinese
The intelligence
warships
failure was
continue,
complete. We had built
maneuvering
a
around
$500
Taiwan.
million brain
American
and left it in a
reconnaissance
reach-back
aircraft
position that
remain
any
airborne across
mid-tier
the
ballistic
Pacific.
power could touch.
Japanese
Behind
and
every
Taiwanese
one of those
fighter crews
windowless
stay on combat
containers at
alert,
Al Asad,
while
there are
satellites
teams of
overhead monitor
technicians,
every
signal
movement in the
corps
Taiwan
officers,
Strait.
and data
And
specialists
somewhere
who
beneath
work
the
in
surface of
total
the ocean,
obscurity.
attack
They are the ones
submarines
who
from
keep the
multiple nations
universal
are now
translator
shadowing each
running
other
so
in
that our
silence.
pilots and boots on the
Because
ground
every
can see the
military
whole
planner
board.
understands
To the
the
veterans who
terrifying
served at
truth
Al
behind
Assad
this crisis.
during the strike,
If a
or
real
anyone who has
blockade
worked in
ever
a
begins, the world
BACN
economy
unit,
itself
we
could
know that your job
be thrown
is
into
often the
chaos within
first
days.
target when the
Nearly half of
invisible
global
war
container
turns
shipping
kinetic.
passes through
If
nearby
you've
waters.
ever had to maintain a
Semiconductor
high-value
supply
signal
chains
node
critical
in a
to the
high-threat
entire modern
environment, share your
technological
story
world
in the comments.
depend heavily on
What is the
Taiwan's
one thing
stability.
people get wrong
This is
about
no
the
longer
nerve
just a
centers of
regional
the U.S.
dispute.
military?
It is a
We want to
pressure
hear
point
from the
capable of
keep
shaking
the lines
entire
open when the
international
missiles start
system.
falling.
And the
To
most
understand
dangerous
why
part
this
is
mattered,
this.
you have to
Every
understand
new
the
exercise
E-11A.
makes the next
While the
one
ground
easier to
station at Al
normalize.
Asad was the
Every
brain,
encirclement
the
operation teaches
E-11A
valuable
aircraft, a
operational
modified Bombardier Global
Every
6000,
response
is the
reveals
eye.
intelligence.
It flies at
Battlefield
40,000
is
feet,
reversed
acting as a high-altitude Wi-Fi
The question
router
is no
for the
longer
entire
whether China
theater
can
of
surround
war.
Taiwan temporarily.
But a router is
The question
useless
now
if it has no
terrifying
connection to the fiber
strategists
line.
worldwide is
The
this. At what point does a
BACN
military
ground
exercise
station
stop
was
being a
that
drill
connection.
and
When the
become a real
Iranian missiles
operation?
leveled the